Film is actually one of the newest mediums, with video games being the newest. Over the past century of films, there have been some incredible movies, with each decade seemingly shifting style. But which movie has been the best of each decade? Rules are simple. We shall start off with the 1910s. Owing to the fact that feature-length movies became prominent then, the movies can be from anywhere across the world, and it can only be judged on its year of release, not the year it was made. For example, the cult classic American Psycho was made in 1999 but released in the year 2000, meaning it will qualify for the 2000s rather than the 1990s. So here are the best movies of each decade.
Get me the hell out of here!
As before, we start with the 1910s. The 1910s were the true birth of narrative feature-length cinema. The 1900s were mainly shorter films that were experimental or silent. And I think we should give a little nod to the great train robbery for this shot, which inspired this shot from Goodfellas. But the 1910s were notable for creating a lot of the rules and cinematic conventions that are still used today. And there are some really great films of note here. However, the standout film is The Birth of a Nation, a film that is notable for creating a lot of conventions we see today, like flashbacks, tracking shots, and editing. However, the film is extremely racist, which is a shame as it's a really important movie on a technical standpoint. The only thing missing from it on a technical basis is dialogue, as filmmakers hadn't worked out how to mesh on-set audio with visuals yet. And this is where the 20s came in. The 1920s were responsible for so many notable movies such as Nosferatu, Battleship Potemkin, The Gold Rush, The Passion of Joan of Arc, Man with a Movie Camera. And if this video was just about technical innovation and brilliance, The Jazz Singer would certainly win this decade, as it's the first movie to have used recorded audio.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet.
Ever. But this list isn't just about technical advancements, which is why Metropolis wins this round. One of the earliest examples of sci-fi cinema, which influenced movies such as Blade Runner, Star Wars, and The Fifth Element. The German movie is an absolute standout for this decade and made director Fritz Lang one of the most important directors ever, which takes us nicely into the 1930s, where his work features again with M, a serial killer thriller. But the 30s had so many other great films such as City Lights by Charlie Chaplin, 39 Steps, an early Hitchcock flick, Stagecoach, the first ever Disney movie Snow White, not that one, the original, where the prince does save the princess, and a nearly 4-hour epic, Gone with the Wind.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
But the winner here in this decade is The Wizard of Oz, another technically important film. Pushing the boundaries of movie making, shot in rich Technicolor, the troubled production had 4 separate directors throughout its production and had other issues such as Judy Garland being just 16 years old and originally wore a blonde wig and heavy makeup until they decided to present her more naturally. Buddy Ebsen, the original Tin Man, was hospitalized from aluminium dust inhalation and replaced by Jack Haley. Margaret Hamilton, the Wicked Witch, suffered second-degree burns during her fiery exit scene because her green makeup was flammable copper. But the movie is rich in heart, storytelling, and pacing, and even today it stands out, having been brought back into the collective consciousness by last year's release of Wicked. And speaking of Wicked, the 1940s saw the rise of the dictator Hitler, and thusly World War II. Whereas before the World War began, a majority of films had characters that were good-hearted and noble. The 1940s changed this, a trend still seen today with morally ambiguous characters like Michael Corleone, Tony Soprano, Walter White, Thanos, and many more. So, which of the morally ambiguous characters and movies stood out in the 40s? Well, you had Citizen Kane, The Maltese Falcon, Casablanca, Double Indemnity, Brief Encounter, and many others. And for this decade, it's a shootout between Casablanca, which sports perhaps the greatest script ever written in Hollywood history, and Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane being perhaps the second most influential film ever made up until this point. With its use of deep shadows, deep focus, high ceilings, back and forth narrative, and the leading character of whom you really can't help but despise, but by doing so, you also humanize him, this film cuts deep. And for that reason, this decade belongs to Citizen Kane. But it was a close one this time, as Casablanca is a movie often cited as being highly influential to many screenwriters. A greatness that has hardly been matched for its brilliance. And brilliance resonated in the 50s, because the 50s is the strongest decade we've had so far in this video. Just listen to these titles: Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon and Seven Samurai, Sunset Boulevard, All About Eve, A Streetcar Named Desire, Singing in the Rain, Rear Window, On the Waterfront, The Searchers, Past of Glory, Vertigo, Some Like It Hot. It was an incredible decade, maybe the strongest decade in memory for film. However, there is one film I didn't mention which really stands out, and that is Tokyo Story, a beautiful Japanese film by legendary director Ozu. It tells the story of old Japan and new Japan after the war, and how growing old can be lonely and noble. There isn't many films that have ever matched the poetry of this film, from the acting to the shot composition to the score. Now, I have a video about this film on this channel, so do have a watch. But for one film, this film would definitely be the best of the decade. However, Seven Samurai wins this decade. It's one of the most perfect movies ever made, and went on to influence things like Star Wars, which George Lucas personally cited Kurosawa constantly, Saving Private Ryan, The Dirty Dozen, The Wild Bunch, and 13 Assassins, as well as many other movies. It truly established Kurosawa as top 5 best directors ever, and the legacy of the film lives on today. The 1960s certainly had their fair share of excellent films too. Lawrence of Arabia comes to mind, Persona by Bergman, The Battle of the Algiers, The Graduate, and many French New Wave films that influenced Bonnie and Clyde, Midnight Cowboy, and many films on the cusp of the 70s. More than anything though, if not for the quality of the movies, the 60s changed cinema, with American movies taking influence from French films and putting their spin on it. The idea of self-expression and fighting against the natural order of things became a theme, with the civil rights and free love movements. So it is perhaps strange that a film that doesn't really have any of those elements in it wins this decade. And that is Space Odyssey 2001, Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece. A film that heavily influenced Christopher Nolan's whole career, and many other directors of note. However, unlike those earlier films like The Birth of a Nation and Citizen Kane, Space Odyssey is almost impossible to copy or take technical inspiration from. Kubrick was one of a kind, and how he achieved greatness cannot be replicated. And this film is sheer greatness. It's definitely an experience movie rather than a narrative journey, but what an experience. One of the things that no one really mentions about this film is that it had 0 A-list stars and 0 commercial appeal, but it still sits there as one of the greatest films of our time. And the 70s might just live on as one of the greatest decades of our time. This is the most difficult decade to judge so far. We had the Godfather films, Jaws, Star Wars, Chinatown, Taxi Driver, Annie Hall, Network, One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest, Alien, The Exorcist. I could go on. Little experiment. Think of your favorite movie over the past 5 years or so, and think of any movie that's come out in the past, say, 7 months. Now think of all those movies I just mentioned, and you'll be able to trace their DNA directly to this decade. Whether it be slasher horror, a sci-fi or introspective film, dinosaur movie, a thriller, it all links back to this decade. But that is enough of me waxing lyrical about this decade. You want to know which movie won. So let me tell you, for this decade it had to be The Godfather 1 and 2. Now I know that's a little bit boring, and believe me, I attempted to spice things up a little bit and go for a movie that might be deemed a little more left field and exciting, but honestly I just couldn't do it. Reason being, not only is this the best movie of the decade, but maybe of all time too. Whereas I cannot categorically say that about any of the other movies from this decade. And yes, I did say movie as opposed to movies, because yes, I did chicken out and group both of them together. They are basically the same film, made within 18 months of each other. Both are sizzling with class. With pacing that is world class, there's more themes weaved into these films than many others in history. Family, immigration, class, religion, love, betrayal, brotherhood, marriage, and that's not even including the gangster element of the film. No film made ever since comes anywhere near it. Nope, not even you, Joe.
What?
It's him again, because it's the 80s. And the 80s were fun, if not as epic as the 70s. Loads of blockbuster movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Back to the Future, Die Hard, Rambo, Terminator, and E.T. And there were some nimble art house films like Rage and Bull, Do the Right Thing, Cinema Paradiso, Paris, Texas, and My Left Foot. The 80s were the start of commercialized cinema, whereas turning a profit had always been important to Hollywood, especially. This decade was when they decided to eliminate risk and go all in for the dollar. Now, there is a really massive story as to why they did that, which I cover in one of the earlier videos on my channel, so if you want to find out, do watch that. But in the 80s, movies like Batman, Aliens, and the Rambo sequels were cynical cash grabs, rehashing formulas and creating toys to sell to kids. It was only due to the brilliance of the director's helm in Aliens and Batman that these movies became so niche at such a high budget. But amongst the commerce, we had this decade's best movie. And while Cinema Paradiso and Come and See pushed it really hard, the winner is Raging Bull. A tour de force in acting, cinematography, editing, direction, and music. Everything about this film is absolutely perfect. It features the best ever screen performance from an actor by Robert De Niro and some of the best sound design ever committed to film. Martin Scorsese, the film's director, overcame a period of personal issues to make a classic. Raging Bull ran so that Goodfellas could walk.
Hey, what's that movie that Bogart made?
Which one?
The one where he played a cowboy. Only the one.
The Oklahoma Kid.
Shane?
Oklahoma Kid. Shane. Oklahoma Kid.
And that's how we'll hit the 90s. If there's one decade that can rival the 70s, it's the 90s. The Silence of the Lambs, Schindler's List, Pulp Fiction, Three Colors Blue, Shawshank Redemption, Toy Story, Heat, Fargo, The Matrix, Fight Club, Eyes Wide Shut, Haine, All About My Mother. This decade is stacked with classic films. So much so, I've only mentioned just a handful. This was the true height of indie cinema, birthing a lot of the current best directors in the world. Nolan, Paul Thomas Anderson, Tarantino, Jon Favreau, and many others. The year 1999 is definitively the best year for film ever. Period. And therefore, this was a tough decade to choose a standout. Now, if you watch the channel on a regular basis, you might be about to be shocked with this choice, because I think you would assume that it would be Schindler's List as number one. Or maybe you'd assume it would be Pulp Fiction or Shawshank Redemption. However, a bit of a curveball here, because Goodfellas will be the choice for the 90s. This Scorsese classic means that he's the only director in this video to have two best films from two different decades. And the reason for this choice is simple, and maybe a little contradictory to the rules. But we need to be fluid in life. The influence that Goodfellas has with its morally ambiguous characters is the direct result of films that were just as influential as those from the 40s that we discussed earlier. Not only that, but this film is like The Godfather on speed. The best voiceover in cinema history, incredible acting from all the cast, incredible camera work, editing, and music. It's an epic that lasts nearly 3 hours but feels like one. Its lasting impression is significant. Without this film, there's no Sopranos. Without Sopranos, we don't get to Breaking Bad, nor do we get to some of the films that will feature in the last 3 decades of this video. And with that, let's move to the 2000s. So in retrospect, the 2000s were weird. Such a mix of art house, both American and world cinema, blockbusters and sparse indie cinema. The Lies of Us springs to mind, Downfall as well, 2 very strong German films, Spirited Away, City of God, Gladiator, Old Boy, Children of Men, and a lot more world cinema films like Amélie, Amadeus Perez, Pan's Labyrinth, Irreversible, The Piano Teacher, Amour, and so many others. This was a moment in cinema where the divide between world cinema and mainstream cinema began to close, a divide which eventually will lead us to Parasite and Squid Games. And for this year, City of God, the Brazilian epic, was a close contender. but I had to give it to Old Boy, the film that put Korean cinema on the map, and a film which even now, 20 years on, feels as fresh as it did on day one. Exceptional editing, wonderful direction, a typically violent and sadistic Korean tale based on a manga. Not many films will ever get a chance to be compared to Old Boy. But another curveball, because as I wrote this, I failed to acknowledge the brilliance of There Will Be Blood. And whilst I still think Old Boy is marginally better, special praise must be reserved for the excellence that is There Will Be Blood. Director Paul Thomas Anderson peaked with this film, as did Daniel Day-Lewis in the lead role. And Johnny Greenwood on the score also peaked. And by the time the 2010s came around, well, we hit somewhat of a wall. Because yes, there were amazing efforts like Interstellar, Uncut Gems,
Uncut Gems, right?
Whiplash, Call Me By Your Name, Mad Max, 12 Years a Slave, Inside Out, The Social Network, and all of these films have incredible merit. But at this point, each of these films feels like a
copy of a copy of a copy.
And to that point, it was hard to decide which to choose as definitive best. They all felt just like under top tier films in other decades. So much so that it didn't feel right to opt for just one winner, until this gem of a French film came to mind. Otherwise, Inception would have taken the top spot. And the film in question is Intouchables, starring Omar Sy, a beautifully touching film. The simplicity in the storytelling and direction is this film's charm. Mind you, it's a far cry from some of the bigger names mentioned so far in this video throughout the decades. It's less bold, less loud, less budgeted, but it packs a huge punch nonetheless. Unlike the 2020s, which in fairness is an unfinished decade, so it kind of feels unfair to name a definitive winner. Therefore, I shan't exactly do so. However, there are some standouts. After Sun, Anatomy of a Fall, and Another Round are really exceptional films, all of which are world cinema films as well. Although it's rather debatable if After Sun is actually world cinema. It's directed by Charlotte Wells, who is British, and it's officially a UK film backed by the BFI, BBC Films, and Film 4. However, distribution was handled by A24. And the fact that 3 of those 3 films, if not 2, are classified as world cinema really puts American movies nowadays in the shade. So if you've been paying close attention to this video, that means the winner in the past 3 decades have all been world cinema film. What this says about the future of cinema is very interesting, if it says anything at all. I would say that it speaks to a shift in the paradigm, less pioneering American projects, more inspired world cinema projects, but maybe cinema in general is in need of a French new wave-esque adrenaline shot. Either way, it's a fascinating trend, and not necessarily a bad one. Anyway, what do you guys think? Which would be your top choices from each decade? Let me know in the comments. And what is your favourite film of the 2020s? Now, a lot of this video, surprisingly, comes from my own knowledge of film, and it kind of makes me think that maybe I should use this brain power to become something else, like a lawyer, for example. It pays more, I'm sure. But I would love if you guys could hit the like button and help this channel grow. And big love into the next video.